In Octagon I write, 221 AD. The stone-wrought deck of the Atonite stood threaded with thousands of luminous symbols, each overspilling with the necrotic aspect of magic, so that the arc shone like a jade star among dead skies. It was the only star I recognized in the realm of the dead, for the many lights that teemed above had long ago passed from the realm of the living. They could offer me no guidance. These bewildering sights did not distract me for long, however, for the gnawing anguish of my bloodthirst soon seized my throat anew. Inside, I felt the blood diminished, less able to propel the shell of dead flesh that was its vessel, my vessel. Amarex, please, tell me what must be done.
You must take the maw below. You must seek the grave of Gwyneth Armin.
I can scarcely move myself at the moment. That thing weighs as much as a house.
It is not its weight that impedes you. Rather, you must resist its power in order to move it. And this power is great. Thus, great effort is required.
Either way, I can no longer carry it.
You can, because I sealed it when you brought it on board. Otherwise, it would have consumed the Atonite.
I looked to the maw which lay upon the deck. The strange relief of a three-eyed visage gazed up at me, but the vertical passage of its mouth was no more. What is this thing? I said, lifting the now nearly weightless stone from the deck. What is its purpose?
Their original purpose is not known, but they make very effective prisons.
I didn't know Deadhaus took prisoners.
Some things are too difficult to destroy, but also too dangerous to ignore. For them, we have the Hollow Maws.
Like that shadow, the one with 6 eyes.
A servant of Sassan Mirage, a demon.
Is Deadhaus at war with them too?
We've managed to avoid that thus far. The demons are loath to leave the Abyss. They withhold their presence from Valorum, though occasionally they seep through the shadows of Anumat. Better to trap them there than allow their return to the Sun Eater.
What do they want?
They want what their ancient wants, as do all great houses. But we need not concern ourselves with them yet. One war at a time.
Once more, the hideous thirst crushed all thought from my mind. The grave. Where is the grave?
For that, you will need a guide. But with the Helmstone shattered, I must remain aboard to assure the Atonite remains in place.
With that, the Lich snapped his skeletal fingers, and a streak of sickly green light emerged from behind one of the masts. It was the little shade we'd found in the tithe hold, and it bobbed uncertainly near the mast. Amarax pointed at the spirit, and slowly it drew near to him, though I could see from the translucent image of its simple eyes and mouth that it struggled against the command. The Lich withdrew a golden locket from his robes and held it before the shade.
You will find the soul to whom this belongs. You will guide the fledgling.
The shade trembled as the Lich spoke. Then Amarax passed the locket to me, and the shade darted behind me.
Take the maw. Go below. Follow the shade and make haste. The Atonite can only remain tethered to this realm while charged with the necrotic aspect. When the soul prism is spent, the arc will slip back into the etheric sea.
I said nothing, but leapt atop the bulwark with the maw tucked under one arm and stepped forward without so much as a downward glance. The mist poured from my mouth as I fell, encircling me, becoming me. And so too was the maw enveloped and dispersed. And from the mist did many bats burst forth, their shrill cries piercing the endless dark. They swirled ever downward, spiraling toward an enormous statue of a veiled figure, gathering above one of its outstretched palms. The bats flew into one another, bursting into mist just before colliding, followed by ever more, until the mist grew into a cloud, and when it dispersed, I remained as Alaric the Damned once more, perched upon the open hand of the figure veiled in stone. The statue that held me stood amidst a disorienting jumble of terrain and structures. I suppose I could call it a cemetery, but this would barely touch its nature. Gravestones jutted from the ground in great huddles, wedged violently together, overlapping, clambering atop each other. So many was there that at times they seemed like vast walls of mangled masonry, and stone sarcophagi sprawled in droves, lidless, covered, broken, whole, hundreds, thousands, as far as my vampiric sight could pierce. The ground, covered in pale, dead grasses, was uneven. It sloped down in a way at such an angle that in places the gravestone and sarcophagi seemed as much stairs as walls. How can it be that the dead are buried in their own realm? I thought.
These are the sundered graves. Each is a passage for those who were given proper burials on Malorum.
And what of those who go unburied?
So long as they are given funerary rites, souls may enter the realm of the dead by dirt, flame, or water, and will arrive in kind.
What of those forgotten? Those given no rites?
Without the proper rituals, they are doomed to wander Malorum as ghosts.
My telepathic discourse was suddenly cut short by the voice of a great bell. Each toll bestirred my blood with tidal force, beckoning me to follow, to stand before the mighty bell. I was not alone in this calling. As the bell tolled, coffin lids swung wide as doors. Stone covers slid free of their sarcophagi, and all around the dead began to rise. Slowly, methodically, as if in a trance, they emerged from their resting places. Their forms resembled what they were in life, though no longer flesh and bone, but pale light, translucent and green. Some were dressed in rags, others finery. They stared, expressionless, each without eyes, saying nothing. With trance-like movement, they pulled themselves from their graves and began to shuffle towards the sound of the bell, forming orderly lines along the paths that were available to them, the dead roads that sloped ever downward. Are they foes? Will they attack?
So long as you do not impede them, they will ignore you.
And what would happen if I were to strike down the dead here?
Then, to their graves they would return, until the bell tolled again.
A streak of sickly green descended from darkened skies then. The shade, just now having completed its journey from the deck of the Atenite, bobbed before me, expectantly. I reached for it, and it drew away, down towards the pale dead grasses. I leapt from the statue's hand, barely clearing any vertical distance, and feeling the now unfamiliar sensation of impact as my feet struck the ground. My legs wobbled in surprise, but I held myself upright. "Lead the way, little shade," I said, and the sickly green light drifted forward. Though the shade was not very quick, I struggled to keep pace. The blood dribbled through me like tar, suffusing my entire being with gnawing pain. I moved alongside the rows of the dead who shuffled in unison towards the sound of the bell. Their forms faded in and out of being, sometimes little more than flickers of green, but they seemed unaffected, if they noticed at all. I clambered over gravestones and sarcophagi as best I could with the maw tucked under one arm, and at length I found from where the bell tolled, a massive structure that stood astride a black river. I thought at first it might have been wrought of marble or limestone, but as I drew closer, I realized the grim truth. The entire structure was adorned with a macabre tracery of entwined bones, as if they had been woven together, marking its facade with an almost lace-like pattern. It was from this horrid place that the dread bell called, from high arches and sharpened spires that stabbed up into the dark, threading streaks of sickly green that ever sighed in their flight. In many niches, carven figures stood silent and veiled like the statue in the sundered graves, their skeletal faces solemn and bowed, each clinging to sighs that stood taller than themselves. Bone steps rose to bone doors flung wide, where the dead marched together, and above this entrance, a great circular window, its mullions wrought into the signs of Alalmat. My God, what is this place?
It is a pale temple, a place of worship. No, get back here.
What? What? I crouched, startled by the force of the voice in my thoughts.
Not you.
I saw then that the shade had begun to drift towards the temple doors.
Don't make me come down there.
The Lich's voice emanated from my mind, and the shade quickly returned to my side.
Move along now, Alaric.
Once more I followed the shade, leaving the pale temple to the dead that streamed into it. The tolling of the bell slowly faded behind me, and ultimately fell silent. The shade took us along the river, whose black waters sank to unguessable depths, and I saw that the hills rose on all sides of the temple, each strewn thickly with tombs, like rows of mangled teeth, dim white under the light of dead stars. A groaning, grinding noise rose from those hills then, and I felt the ground beneath me shudder. I saw the hills rack and tear, splitting open to disgorge more graves, new tombs grinding old to dust. What's happening?
More have been buried, their rites conducted, and so their graves are sundered in the realm of the dead.
As the Lich spoke, the bell began to toll once more, and though I could not see them, I knew that the newly dead would soon begin their march to the Pale Temple. I followed the shade, which followed the river still, far from the sundered graves, until the land was flat and grey. It seemed at first that snow was falling here, but by its smell I knew it to be ash, and with it fell soft lights, jade embers that gave no heat, even as they fell upon my face. I dragged my aching body through the grey, leaving tracks for the first time since my death. But ash fell into the river, was followed by the darkness. The jade embers were not extinguished by the water, but sank down beyond my sight.
Watch your step in the Pyrrhic fields.
I see no perils.
Follow the shade closely.
The shade, which had veered away from the river, did not drift in a straight line, but rather arced and swerved, and I kept as close to it as I could manage. Soon, I learned why Amarax had advised me to, as a gout of bright green flame burst from the ground, spraying ash high into the sky. As the fire faded, the pale, translucent form of a severed soul stood in its place. His body was burned?
Correct. And he was given his rights.
The soul stood staring ahead, eyeless, and I left it behind. Here and there, new fires emerged, blasting through the ash, thrashing my coat in their proximity, and with each eruption came the echoes of voices, of chants and recitations, of elegies that emanated from Malorum by those that gathered round the one that burned. As each fire faded, a severed soul stood in its place, and I saw that in the Pyrrhic fields so many stood unmoving, untouched by the falling ash, until at last a new bell tolled, and all at once so many green lights began to move, to march in unison. We moved beyond the fields until ash fell no longer, and thick mist fell upon me as a veil, clouding even my vampiric sight. Still, the glow of the shade lit my way, and I followed blindly, now beginning to stumble.
The Veil of Vestiges. I thought she might be here.
You might have dropped me closer to it.
I can barely keep the Atonite afloat without the Helmstone.
It's getting harder to move.
Yet, still you must.
Can't you help me somehow with your magic?
There is no substitute for the blood of the living, I'm afraid.
What will happen if I cannot drink?
Your blood will consume itself.
And then?
Once its volume reaches a critical threshold, it will crystallize to preserve itself. Your body will desiccate and crumble, and what is left of your blood will remain as a bloodstone, highly resistant, quite valuable.
Wonderful. And I suppose that's the end of me?
Not necessarily. If exposed to sufficient levels of mortal blood, the bloodstone can restore itself. Yourself, rather.
At least the pain will stop.
Oh, no. You'll be quite conscious. Not of the outside world, but your thirst. You'll feel it at its greatest strength for however long you remain crystallized.
Please, not that.
I suppose that's why vampires come back mad sometimes, depending on how long they were crystallized.
In the back of my mind, I could feel that, though he felt no sympathy, no pity, neither did Amarax delight in what he told me. He gave these answers as he would any others, as a matter of fact. He was indifferent to suffering, perhaps unaware of what it meant anymore. Maybe he left that memory behind long ago. Please, Shade, please hurry. To my surprise, the Shade did hasten its pace, and I did as best I could to hasten mine. Then a shape loomed out of the mist, an abandoned church, the sight of which chilled my diminished blood. I had seen it before. Many hooves thundered from the mist behind me, and as I turned, a figure blurred past me, too quickly to discern its features, and disappeared into the church. Then came 11 Thasian horsemen in thunderous pursuit, their steeds a spectral green like themselves, their translucent forms wavering in the mist. One of them dismounted and approached the church doors. "No," I whispered.
"I invite you in,"
a voice said from the church. "No!"
"I killed your friends. Their blood seeps into the room even now. It smells so sweet."
The horseman drew his sword in wrath and stepped into the shadows of the church. His screams followed shortly after, and the sound of tearing flesh. Others drew their swords. Some dismounted. They were shouting, arguing. Before long, they crossed as one into the church. This time, I followed them. The sight was much the same as I remembered. I saw it there in the darkness. Glimpses of it. Flickers of predation. It fell upon the horsemen as if from all sides, slicing into them, dragging them screaming into the shadows. They called for me, begging me to help them. I dropped them all, reeling on my feet, and thrust my palm at the creature in the dark, but no power rose from me. In the time it had taken me to do this, they had all been slain, and the lone figure stood watching me from afar. I staggered toward it, sinking to my knees. "Damn you!"
"I am damned already,"
it answered, smiling as it stepped forward. I knew its face. I had seen it when I looked through the eyes of Amarax upon the Ark. A monster. Then darkness fell upon me, and for a moment I knew no thirst. I knew nothing. Through the darkness, I heard a woman's voice call to me.
"The blood of ages flows so sweet. Come, drink from us."
And blood was upon my lips. My mouth opened, taking in the scorching elixir. It was as if every inch of me could taste and had been coated in burning honey. It was as painful as it was rapturous, horrifying in its intensity. And yet I was powerless to stop how desperately I devoured the blood. Sight and sound returned to me, and I saw that my head lay in a woman's lap, whose hands cupped blood above my face that trickled through her fingers to my lips. My hands clasped hers by reflex, pulling them to my mouth and taking the rest of the blood from them. Then my body was racked with convulsions as the living blood mingled with my own, quickening it from its languor into a boiling vortex. When the roiling had subsided, I staggered to my feet and saw the woman standing before me. She was as beautiful as she was terrible to behold. A gown of gossamer white adorned her body, pale as the flesh beneath, save for the red upon her neck. For her throat had been cut wide open, yet she smiled softly. Her dead eyes, glassy and pale, seemed to stare through me, and her long black hair flowed out around her as if underwater. She was both maiden and monster. I had seen her like before, knew her to be a banshee, and therefore part of Deadhaus. Part of me knew I was in great danger, but I could scarcely register those thoughts. The blood spoke for me. I need more.
There is more.
Her voice permeated my thoughts, though her mouth did not move. She stepped aside, her gown flowing as if underwater, and gestured to an altar where an enormous veiled statue rose, the same as I had seen in the sundered graves. Blood ran in rivulets from the stone folds of its veil, down its wrist and outstretched hand, dripping from its fingers as it had from hers. I lurched past her, rushing for the statue, but soon felt a cold fire press against the back of my neck. My body seized, and my blood no longer flowed. I had felt something like this before on the day that Thacia fell. It was the touch of death itself. I strained my neck as best I could to see that she held the point of an elongated sewing needle against it.
The unclean may not touch the icon of the Weaver.
Please. The scent of blood so close felt as if gravity itself had reoriented towards the statue, and yet I was utterly motionless, without as within. I'll do anything.
Then kneel before our Lord.
The needle was removed from the back of my neck, but kept hovering just above it. Every drop of blood in me surged forward, but I knew what awaited me if I obeyed the impulse, for the touch of the needle was as the fangs of the pillar. It could give me true death. With trembling restraint, I knelt, eyes locked on the veiled statue.
Good. You can resist your thirst. You can listen.
Not for long.
I will feed you.
She stepped towards the statue, her bare feet only briefly touching the floor, her body floating between steps. She cupped her hands beneath the statue, and I listened to the agony of them filling with blood, drop by drop. Then she turned and stepped off the floor, floating before me, sinking to her knees and offering her blood-filled hands, and I fed from them, seeing no visions as I did. More. I need more. I told her once I'd finished. I could feel my strength returning slowly, but it was not enough.
I know. Stay.
Again she rose and went to the statue, and again she returned to me, feeding me of the blood that gave no visions. And as she fed me, she spoke to me, telling me of things I shall not write now, of 9 gods and the beginning of all. I realized as I listened that Amarax had told me some of this before. He was reciting a portion of the Pale Doctrine when we made our contract. Now I heard the stories in full detail, but I will write of them later. Eventually, the stories were finished, and I was, well, I cannot say sated, but at my full strength. Thank you.
Thank the Weaver. It bade me to the veil.
I nodded, but the banshee simply stared at me expectantly. Thank you, Weaver.
Bow your head.
I did as she commanded.
Fold your hands.
Again, I obeyed.
Close your eyes and recite my words. O blessed Weaver, I beseech thee.
O blessed Weaver, I beseech thee.
I thank thee for deliverance from life.
I thank thee for deliverance from life.
I thank thee for deliverance from thirst.
I thank thee for deliverance from thirst.
And so shall I deliver unto thee.
And so shall I deliver unto thee
Unwoven souls for thy tapestry.
unwoven souls for thy tapestry.
Amen.
Amen. When I opened my eyes, the statue was bloodless, as if it had been scoured.
You may rise.
I stood then to notice for the first time the chamber that held me. Vaulted ceilings loomed above, etched with a lace-like tracery of bones. Behind me, rows of skeletal pews stretch across the open floor, their backs wrought of backbones, their armrests of arm bones, and their feet of the same absurdly gruesome pattern. Many souls sat in those pews, their translucent heads bowed in prayer, and other banshees sat praying with them. Each banshee was dressed in gossamer. Each had her throat cut, but their hair was bound in a knot at the nape of their necks, fastened in place with elongated needles. I stood surrounded by enemies, yet I sensed no danger, no hostility. Indeed, they had delivered me from a fate far worse than death. Did they know who I was? Who resided within me? The Lich had been utterly silent since I woke. I decided to say nothing of my identity. A pale temple. You brought me here?
The Weaver brought you here. I was but the instrument of its will.
I see. And you are?
I am a sister of the Death's Head Coven. I am called Kiva.
Kiva. Am I to understand that I may pray to the Weaver for blood?
The Weaver will always hear your prayers. But there is only one petition it will answer. Death.
Then why did the statue bleed?
We do not question the Weaver's will. We accept its blessings and give thanks.
By sending it souls.
Yes. Those that die and are given their rights may enter this realm. The pale temples call to them with the death knell, and the souls gather here to pray before passing below.
She nodded toward a stairway that led below the temple floor. The distant echo of a woman's weeping emanated from the passage, the likes of which I once heard through the waystone at S03-E09. Why does she weep? I asked, but Kiva only stared sorrowfully ahead. What do they pray then?
Some for mercy, some for justice. We pray with them for as long as they need. When they are ready, they pass below.
But the Weaver only answers prayers for death?
Death is mercy. Death is justice. In time, it will answer all.
And what of those that die forgotten? Those that must wander Malorum as ghosts?
They are the work of the Coven, to find and give their rights, to put to rest. You too may aid in this, and we will favor you. For just as Malorum is full of ghosts, so too is our realm full of those that did not heed the death knell. They are the lost, and we must guide them here, to be brought below.
I cannot. I have a quest of my own, I said, remembering then my purpose in this forsaken realm, hoping that I might leave the temple without incident. There was a spirit with me when I fell, a shade. Kiva held her dagger-like needle up between thumb and forefinger, and a streak of sickly green flew to it and began to orbit it.
Your guide.
Yes, I said with some hesitation, not knowing what all she knew.
Go with Alaric, child. Show him the way to the grave of Gwyneth Armen.
The shade obeyed without hesitation, without resistance or fear. It flew to me and began to circle my left hand. My blood tensed inside, ready to blast, to flee, You know my name? My purpose?
For I was bade by the Weaver to retrieve you, to set you on your quest anew. I believe this belongs to you.
She gestured to the maw, which lay upon one of the skeletal pews, and I scooped it up under one arm. Am I not your enemy? Have I not violated the ritual?
Not as much as the one within you.
As she said this, she brought the needle near her head, and her hair swept itself into a knot at the base of her neck, which she pierced with the needle, holding it in place.
We'll deal with him later.
Is that so? Then do you know how to... The back of my left hand burned with cold fire, and the sigil upon it brightened. I sighed. In the Vale, I saw something. A place I'd been before.
The Vale of Vestiges is where the lost wander. They do not know that they are dead. They do not accept it. Instead, they see only what they were in life. Places, people. And this is reflected in the Vale. You saw an echo of the lost.
I saw something else. I saw myself. But it wasn't me. I was there that day. I did not kill them.
Did you not?
To this, I said nothing, but turned to leave the temple.
Alaric,
Kiva called after me, and I stopped.
beware the soul of Gwyneth Armin.
Then the bell tolled its death knell, and the doors of the temple flung wide. I walked against the stream of souls that marched in long lines of translucent green. The ones who came to pray with the banshees and to pass below. When I stepped outside, I saw that I was in the Pyric fields, and the temple behind me straddled another great river. A familiar voice echoed in my mind.
Alaric, you persist. I thought for certain you were a bloodstone by now.
I was delivered.
Oh?
Kiva took me to a pale temple.
And you've emerged with your sentience intact. You're luckier than I thought.
I don't think I'm the one they're after.
But you're freshly fed. How can this be?
The icon of the Weaver bled for me.
Strange. Most strange.
The shade began to drift away from the temple, and I followed, no longer leaving footprints in the ashes. You can go faster now, little shade. Fast as you can. The shade streaked ahead into the falling ash, and I followed with ease, once more able to move as a blur. We reached the wall of mist that marked the boundary of the Vale of Vestiges, and I grit my fangs and pushed inside. I saw shapes moving in the fog, sometimes structures, sometimes people, arguing, weeping. I saw figures gathered round a gallows, watching a lost soul swing. I saw children skipping through the mist, humming to themselves. I ignored them all and chased the shade, and then it stopped. Below its sickly green light, a tombstone was illuminated. Engraved on its face were the words, "Here lies Gwyneth Armin, Deceiver." Well, here we are, Lich. What would you have me do?
You must dig.
So I had no shovel. I also had no need of one. I set down the maw and reached for the soil beneath the tombstone. Waves of telekinetic force split the ground, and as I lifted my hand above my head, so too did mounds of dirt wrench free and float above me. With a sweep of my hand, they were cast aside, and a moldering coffin was revealed.
Now place your hands on the maw, but don't touch where its mouth was. I'm going to open it.
I did as the Lich instructed. Green energy crackled from within me and through my hands, tracing the visage of the maw, parting the stone so that it opened into a vertical mouth beneath 3 eyes. At once, the maw grew hundreds of times heavier.
Now, open the coffin and touch the mouth of the maw to the remains.
With some difficulty, I shifted the weight of the maw to one arm, then, with a flick of my free wrist, ripped the lid of the coffin free with telekinesis. The inside was darker than my eyes could pierce, a preternatural darkness. I descended into the grave, hefting the maw with me, straddling the pitch-black opening of the coffin. I can't see the remains. I can't see anything.
What? I can see them. Just bend down and touch the maw to them.
I assume that Amarax's attunement to magic granted him vision that was denied to me. In truth, it was his vision that was obscured. As I knelt down, carefully maneuvering the maw so as not to touch its mouth, a tangle of strange, fleshy cords burst from the darkness and seized my leg. I had no time to scream before they pulled me down into the dark. And I learned then that this was no coffin, but a door. Alaric the Damned.